everyone. This is Adham here. So I wanted to quickly share with you my 2 cents on a topic that I've been asked a lot about lately. But first, so this is going to be part of a series that I'm doing called Quick Wins. So I'm going to try to touch on some really important career questions that come from all of you that I think are quick wins and can quickly produce very positive result for your career, whether it's interviewing or on the job development or anything like that, in just a few minutes of listening and some content. So this is part of the series and the first episode in that. And today we will touch on how to improve on case interviews. But first, because I realize some of you might be watching this video on YouTube or something and you're not subscribers to my newsletter, so let me introduce myself really quickly. So my name is Adham Abdel Fattah. I've been at McKinsey & Company 5 years and was an engagement manager in the New York office. I was at Amazon for more than 3 years, built a business there from the ground up. Have an MBA from Columbia, and I've been in multiple startups. So just a quick 10-second introduction about myself for those of you who are not familiar. Now, the question I get a lot, and I've gotten it like 4 or 5 times in the last week alone, is I get lost in case interviews. And not lost in preparation, but rather during the interview itself. I ramble a lot. I'm not sure what the interviewer wants me to do. I tend to go on tangents, etc. And this is what we'll be touching upon today. Now, before we jump into that, let me introduce a very important concept that I think is going to be very relevant to what we're going to say today, which is do not be a false negative. When you think about it, when you interview for a job, you could be doing well in the interview, but you're not a fit for the job. You could be doing bad in the interview, but you are a fit for the job. Like if you were on the job, you would do a fantastic job, but you just didn't perform well in the interview itself. And that is what is a false negative. Now, what is rarely known is that false negatives are a serious problem for top companies. And this is because of a very simple reason. High performing talent is in really short supply, particularly for top technology, consulting, investment banking, and top startups as well. So a false negative is actually a problem for the hiring manager. Think about it this way. If I'm the hiring manager and I have to interview, let's say, 20 people to find a good candidate that is a fit for the job. And that is actually a generous assumption. In my experience, and I've interviewed hundreds and hundreds of candidates, we're talking about maybe 1 in 50 is the right fit. So if I interview 50 candidates and I pass on a candidate who would be really good on the job, but they just didn't do well on the interview day itself, and I don't know that for sure because I can only see the interview, then I'll have to interview another 50 candidates, right? Theoretically speaking. I know the math isn't 100% accurate, but you get what I'm trying to say. So it is a problem for the company you're interested in and for the interviewer. So you really don't want to be a false negative where you'd be a great performer on the job, but you just didn't do well on the interview day. So this episode will talk about how not to do that on case interviews particularly. Now, some examples I was asked lately. I tend to go on tangents during case interview, as in I pick a topic and I just keep going on it, or I end up diverting from the main case into other topics and I ramble on. Sometimes I get asked, the case often has potentially many directions. It could be revenue, it could be cost, it could be technology, it could be marketing. I am not sure which one my interviewer expects me to push further, and I just keep going on all fronts. I also get asked, when am I supposed to start doing calculations? Should I jump into that right away? I get lost and I'm not sure. So it's a really, really, really simple, quick win. Good interviewers should steer the interview in the direction that they want the case to go. But you have a responsibility as well. So a good interviewer is going to be really invested in avoiding false negatives. So they will try as much as possible to steer you in the general direction of where they think this case should be going. They also will steer you in the direction of where they know the case limits are. So a good case interviewer is not gonna try to trick you. It's not an exercise in trickery, right? They actually want you to perform well. And that's why I told you about the false negative problem, because I want to establish in our minds that it is in the interviewer's best interest to have you be successful in the case interview. And I know case interviews are hard, and I know they're quite tricky sometimes, but it's in your interests are aligned with those of the interviewer. It's not a test, right? Now, it's not all on you. The interviewer bears responsibility there. And we'll talk in a second about how to make the interviewer assume that responsibility and act on it, which is the whole point of this episode. But before we get there, your responsibility is to, or the expectation from you in a case interview is to identify the issues, to be able to adjust course when you get feedback during the interview very quickly, and sometimes be able to prioritize and then, of course, pull the thread on an issue or a direction that you've been told to go through and sort of dissect that a little further. Now, they're testing your ability to structure things, communicate effectively, and your business judgment. Remember these three things. It's extremely important. The ability to structure things, the ability to communicate effectively with your interviewer, because you're going to need to do that on the job. And then finally, your business acumen, your business judgment, your intuition, because intuition is something that is really hard to build. And everybody wants to hire candidates with strong business intuition. Even software engineers, and I've interviewed dozens and dozens of them because I was leading a product management team, and software engineers were our partners. So usually we do joint loops of interviews, and even those, like you also want people who have a sound business judgment and a sound intuition, because at the end of the day, we're all working to solve business problems, no matter what we do, whether we're marketers, we're product managers, we're management consultants, we're software engineers, we're data scientists. That's what we're doing. So you're supposed to structure, communicate, and show business judgment. Now, what you can do to solve this issue of getting lost and rambling on and not being sure which direction to take the case is actually do the 4 magic questions to make your interviewer steer the case for you. That is a key skill in doing case interviews. It's much more important than, being able to calculate numbers quickly. I know a lot of the interview prep material out there is like, when you're doing case interviews, spend your days practicing your numbers and making sure that you can do math on the fly. Yeah, sure, that's important to be able to do math on the fly. But the key skill is actually, how do you make your interviewer steer the case for you and do their job? Because sometimes they won't. Now, there are 4 components to this. One is structure your thinking and lay out a plan to the interviewer. So let's say you got, a question about a shipping company that wants to become more profitable, right? And your answer should be something like, well, the cost of the shipping company can be broken down into costs of the trips, costs of waiting times, and overhead costs. Probably trip costs are the most important, so I plan to explore those further. Does that sound like a plan? Right? So, right, just notice one thing here. You've put a forcing function on the interviewer to respond to you and give you feedback, because they might respond saying, well, actually, let's ignore trip costs and let's focus on fixed costs or overheads because this shipping company has blah, 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 blah. And they will give you more information about the case. So you've done two things. First, you've laid out plans, showed the interviewer that you're a structured thinker and you can break things down and have a plan for them. And then you forced them to sort of expose their hand and say, okay, here's another piece of information about this case. And finally, for the problem we're talking about today, you also forced their hand to help you steer the case in the direction they want, because cases are open-ended. They can be anything, but he has or she has something in mind. Now, the second part is turning the table, so which have some overlap with the first part, which is basically to ask the simple question of, would you like me to focus on one area, or should I flesh all areas out? Right? It's very similar to the first one. The main difference is you're really asking the question of, should I flesh everything out? Which is basically telling your interviewer, hey, like subtly, hey, I'm able to flesh everything out, but I'm giving you the chance to tell me whether there is a particular direction that you have in mind so that we can be efficient. So that's already sending a positive signal and avoiding that confusion of rambling on or talking about too many different things. The third thing is make assumptions and confirm them. So make the assumption of something like, I probably think that we should assume that the population that this company is targeting is young females between the ages of 18 and 34, right? If you're, for example, having a case about a consumer technology company that is doing some subscription model or something like that. And then when you say that, just ask them, does that make sense? So that the third magic question, right? Does that make sense to you? And the reason I put it this way is you want to be able to show that you can make a certain assumptions, but at the same time that you're open to feedback and iterating on your assumptions. You don't want to say just like that, who is the target customer? No, because in real life you'll have to guess a lot and make assumptions and then iterate on these assumptions. So form a perspective, say it, but very, very importantly, ask the third magic question of, does that make sense? Again, we're following the theme of forcing your interviewer to engage and give you feedback live. The fourth thing, which I see a lot of people not doing, frankly, which is sometimes is just such a waste. Ask about data. Right, so you guessed that the target segment is young females between 18 and 30 or something like that, and then you can start asking, hey, should I estimate how many there are in this customer segment in the United States, for example, or do you have a number you want to share with me? Don't be shy to ask about data. And it's a fine line. Sometimes the question is posed like I just said it. Should I guess, or do you want to share some numbers with me? And sometimes it's, what do you think, not what do you think, what is the number here? Because sometimes it's just not something you can estimate. Like if it's a margin for a particular company or something like that. So it's a fine line, and you have to iterate on it depending on what the case is and how the interview has been going. Now, so just to summarize, we've said you need to ask a question around your structure, and that is not just at the beginning of the case, even though at the beginning of the case is a must, but even throughout the case as you drill deeper. Lay out the structure and ask if this sounds like a plan to your interviewer. The second thing is turn the table and ask your interviewer if they would like to focus on one area in what you've broken down so far versus the other. The third is make assumption and then ask your interviewer if those make sense to them. And finally, ask about data, whether it's something you can guess or whether it's something that you cannot guess or form an on-the-fly estimate for, and just want straight data input from your interviewer. 4 things. The theme between all 4, the common ground is ask your interviewer in order to force them to help you steer the case so that you don't get lost, you don't end up rambling on, you don't end up going on tangents, and you don't end up wasting half of the case's time on a direction that was not the right one. And also because you want to send that signal to your interviewer that, hey, I'm engaged, I'm structured, and I'm ready to do a game with 2 people, not just me rambling on. So that's it for this quick topic. I just wanted to touch upon it because I got asked multiple times over the last week or 2. And if you found that helpful, I write case material and a lot of interview tips and career tips and essays at writealot.com. So be sure to go there and subscribe so that you get the newsletter in your inbox. It's about 1 or 2 times a month. You can also follow me on Twitter. My handle is @byadham. And if you've liked that, please subscribe to the YouTube channel below. And I'll see you in the next video. Thank you very much.